With the NFL season approaching, that means it's getting close to fantasy football time. Let's talk some draft strategies for this coming year. First and foremost, though, play your fantasy football on Fantrax. You can find it in the App Store, or you can go to fantrax.com. It is the most customizable app for fantasy football. Let's jump into those draft strategies and tips. Number one, come into your draft with tiered rankings. This means it's not just a straight list, but it breaks that list up into how players should be valued. You can make those on your own. You can have a trusted analyst's rankings. You can get them from a website. Whatever you want to do, make sure your rankings are tiered. Here's a good example why. Mark Andrews is being drafted as the tight end 2 right now. TJ Hockenson is being drafted as the tight end 3, but Mark Andrews is being drafted as the 25th overall player, and TJ Hockenson is being drafted as the 42nd overall player. So just because Andrews goes off the board in your draft doesn't mean immediately you have to jump on TJ Hockenson because he's your next best tight end. Tiered rankings help separate guys for where they should go in drafts. Number two, there's tons of different strategies in the industry talked about a lot. You have zero running back, where you don't take a running back until the later rounds. You have bully running back, where you take running backs early and try to eat up that position. You can try to stack different players from different teams. You can try to anchor your positions, meaning you get a stud for your running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and draft from there. The number one thing that you should be doing in your drafts is drafting the best players available. Draft value. Which directly leads us into point number 3. Don't draft just to set your starting lineup for day one. We don't have to worry about our starting lineup. We want the best possible players on our team leaving the draft. Everything else can be sorted out later. You can set that lineup later. You can make trades. You want the most valuable players for fantasy football on your team. So that goes hand in hand with number 2. We don't have to follow one specific strategy. Let's just draft the best possible players, which later can create the best possible team with the most value. Number 4, draft for upside in the later rounds. It's easy to identify people that might be consistent. Maybe it's veterans in the later rounds that can score us consistently 8 to 12 points. But I think it's better to start just throwing darts in those late rounds. Who are some maybe unproven guys that might pop off this coming season? Who are some guys that can earn a role later on? Sometimes it's the rookies. Maybe they're not hot to start the season, but they earn their role later on. Who's a guy that maybe won't consistently get you 10 points, but randomly can get you 20 points due to some upside? I think in the later rounds, we have to try to identify, hey, maybe right now he doesn't have the most value, but it could be a big difference later on in the season. He can bring some upside to fantasy football. We're tossing darts, and we can drop players and make acquisitions later. Number 5, it's said so often, but it's so true. Go and get your guys. These are the guys you are higher on than consensus. You have big hopes for this coming season. You really want on your fantasy teams. It is the worst when you are debating on taking somebody a little too early, and then a couple picks later, somebody else goes and grabs that guy. And then you have to try to figure out a way to get him on your team, and a lot of times it just doesn't happen. Think about last season. You had guys like Ayuk, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. They were all being drafted 40th plus for the wide receiver position, but they finished top 25 in total fantasy points. If you debated on taking Chris Olave, even though you really liked him last season, you would have regretted it later. So go and grab your guys. Fantasy is more fun that way at the end of the day. We talk players here all the time at Fantrax, but it's also important to touch on the strategy piece of the game. Make sure you are following the Fantrax page on all platforms.